So thank you for taking my testimony. I have written testimony that I'll sort of summarize, and generally speaking to House Bill 5329, making some changes to the cannabis legislation. I'm generally in support of this legislation. I think it's great that we are looking at billboards and the impacts of billboards. Broadly speaking, I think as we move forward, the House Republicans had additional proposals that we wanted you all to consider, and I've supplied them in my my testimony. I think as this starts to roll out, we are going to see some of the societal issues that I think need to be addressed. Looking at, for instance, just banning the smoking of cannabis in public housing. I, for one, know when I go out in the public, there is a proliferation. Just doing college tours with my son and staying in hotels, there was a much greater exposure that I think we should just take a look at and address moving forward. Especially if you go into New York, they've rolled it out sooner, and we're starting to see that proliferation. In addition to the suggestions that I put in my testimony here, I also want to speak to overall the Social Equity Council, and I hope the General Law Committee keeps an eye on the work that they do. I think one provision that we need to take a look at is that members of a Social Equity Council should not be allowed to apply as an applicant or profit off of the industry. When we established that council, I actually think that they serve a very important purpose, and I'm concerned that the way we are structured is the fox is sort of in the hen house, and they're making decisions, they're making recommendations to you. They are going to become the experts on this legislation, and I'm concerned that there's no prohibition on their ability to profit off of it. And as we're trying to get our arms around it, I think those type of provisions are really needed to make sure the integrity of the system is set in place. I also think we should be looking at making sure there is a focus on putting money toward, domestic violence, potentially victim funds for people who are impacted by the use of marijuana. We're seeing an uptick in DUIs and on the highways. It's something that has always been discussed. Is there causal relations to the legalization, not just in Connecticut, but nationwide? And how do we deal with that? And I think down the road, we should be taking a look at that as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Chairman D'Agostino. Thank you for coming here today, Representative Candelora. And I just want to highlight the concern over billboard advertising. I find it concerning that whereas we've eliminated the use of billboards for tobacco advertising, we're now seeing this proliferation of come buy your marijuana here. And I just did whether you wanted to expound a bit further on this.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember when I was a kid that like Camel cigarettes used to have you collect the box tops and you get the prizes. And my friends and I would collect that. I wasn't a smoker, but it really attracted kids to that activity. And I think it was necessary that we banned it in cigarettes. And I think we've got to take a look at marijuana, because the difference between, a cigarette, most people, when they try them, when I first tried one, you cough your brains out. With marijuana, these things are put into edible form that is actually tastes good, is attractive to children. So I totally support, looking at banning these advertisements, because adults are going to find the product on their own if they want to get it. We don't need to be marketing for it.
Thank you. And I don't know if you've seen the study that was a Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs, and they found that teens who saw marijuana advertising were 7 times more likely to use the drug weekly and 6 times more likely to suffer from cannabis use disorder. So I think, as we have now made this legal, I think everybody on this in this committee, and I think throughout the legislature, has always been concerned about the possible impact on our youth. And I think anything we can do to minimize that impact is important. So thank you. I have no further questions, Chairman D'Agostino, and thank you for coming here today, Representative Candelora.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I would just note, and happy to get your feedback, Representative, on the Billboard piece. As you know, this is something that we really tried to thread a bit of a needle with the original language, and it's proved very cumbersome and I think difficult from an enforcement standpoint. And so really what we're left is kind of a binary choice of you either have to ban it or allow it. And the sense I'm getting is from both caucuses, I've had members, and there's testimony from House Democratic members with respect to banning it. And I get the sense that from the Republican House caucus, at least, there's the same sentiment. I won't speak for the Senate. Obviously Senator Witkos raised, I think that there's First Amendment. There's a likely challenge here. I think what we heard today and what we've seen in our record is a rather compelling state health, safety, and welfare rationale for a ban. Whether that survives sort of strict scrutiny, if that's the standard that a court ends up applying to a ban like this, is probably something that a court will have to decide. I think there's certainly compelling legal arguments why it would, but that may be something that ends up being played out if this is the policy that we enforce. But that happens on occasion. I'd be curious as just your feedback as to that particular pushback we're hearing from the industry participants.
Yeah, and I can understand that pushback. But one of the things that I struggled with, certainly with, I understand the free speech and the commercial speech. The content of these billboards are inviting people to go over the border into Massachusetts to purchase marijuana, which we all know is an illegal activity if you buy it and bring it back to the state of Connecticut. So I've also struggled with these billboards in that it's not just a simple advertisement. It's actually inviting people to break the law inadvertently. And so to the extent that they're going to put these billboards up, how do you put those qualifiers in place? I mean, we see it on the cigarette packages of the important public safety qualifications that need to go on it. I think that these companies that advertise have that same moral obligation because people are going over the border to Massachusetts, buying pot and bringing it back to Connecticut, thinking that's okay because they saw it on a billboard. So I think it's a lot broader. The issue is a lot more complicated, than just advertising a product.
Excellent point. Representative Tigliano, follow on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This may not be the forum, but I guess I just have a general question. I mean, when we first did the marijuana bill last year, the cannabis bill last year, it did have a restriction or a qualifier on where you could put a billboard. Really, some would say, myself included, that it was an unobtainable goal. You had to prove that it was 90% of the time, nobody under 21 saw the billboard. So nobody challenged that, I don't believe, sir. So I don't know, maybe your opinion or Representative Candelora's opinion, that I think we're on good standing to do the ban, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think there could be standards in place. I mean, the goal here is to not advertise to children. So I think we could put standards in place that achieve that goal. That isn't necessarily a flat out ban, but certainly would prevent kids from seeing it. We all know there's buses and children on highways. This is a problem. And I think, we have an obligation. Everyone knows how I feel about the legalization bill to begin with. But I think we have a moral obligation to put some guardrails and standards around this activity for the sake of our children.
And which we do have on other advertising restrictions, and yet, of course, they're still allowed to advertise. So right. in other mediums. So we're not talking about a complete sort of shut off of any commercial participant's ability to sell their product. We're just trying to restrict it in certain ways to, again, address both. I hadn't even appreciated the sort of encouraging criminality aspect that Representative Candelora raised, which is a good one, in addition to the health, safety, and welfare considerations that Representative Cheeseman pointed out. So I tend to think we're on at least very colorful and strong legal grounds here. We'll have to see how it ends up ends up playing out. Thank you, Representative. I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you for coming and testifying before our committee today.